Chilly here with Sirius Taurus Moon Sol Hour Venus Days. Sun in Cancer. Pluto has ingressed to the 4th degree. Retrograde has ingressed to reverse. uh, 4th degree. And Chiron in Taurus in the 8th house. I was briefly mentioning Moon is about to oppose Mars and Jupiter, 29 degrees Cancer, remediating that opposition with its own gnosis or eureka. Um, I was mentioning in brief how transactional relations don't bring peace and therefore don't bring um, economic prosperity. And Chiron in Taurus is a moment to think about the wound in what has been fixed regarding relations and material resources. So, um, I think not because first of all because it's a transit of a planet that is kind of like a mini intergenerational. I know that Chiron has a really silly walk because it was it can go through a couple of months in a sign to almost a decade in a sign. And um, this is where we see something that right now Chiron is going to spend until 2034, 2036 in Taurus, so it's more like the decade one. So it acts more like an intergenerational planet, more so than before. Okay, whereas Chiron that is only a couple of months would act like a retrograde Mars, or not in the sense that it would be doing the same things that a Mars would do, but in the sense that the duration would be more like a personal planet than an intergenerational one. Now, um, or Venus retrograde, and then of course a good Hellenistic argument with me, for example, would be, hey, Shirley, look at the Venus cycle, and every time Venus is in Leo, and I'm like, absolutely, absolutely, I totally accept that. That is something that I totally agree with. That a personal, supposedly small transit can be, but I think we would see outer planets at the very least correlating. Um, Now, what does it mean that transactional relations don't make peace? For me, I saw it when I was doing apprenticeship in the Israeli-Palestinian Chamber of Commerce, and the atmosphere that was not anywhere like an crude Me Too thingy was already harming the ability to the well-being, but also the ability for initiatives like water interdependency as a foundation of peace for the Middle East to actually work. Now, before you say, "Hey, your country is doing a genocide here, a genocide there," wait, how do people that, it's kind of like, let's go with that point and say, how do people that do genocide created, unfortunately, horrific violence and normalization, whether by tradition, whether by softer things, and the proneness of Taurus about this, I would speak about that, but definitely by sexual boundary violation. Um, but then you would tell me, but surely every country is, and I'm telling you exactly. That's, if you take it before Israel, before 73, before it was actually cool to criticize Israel. Okay, before the oil embargo, let's put it that way. Now, first of all, we all got the point of reference, and secondly, we would talk about what? Not Nazi Germany. And the question is, was it a German way, or was it something that can happen in various ways in every tribe or nation? I'm with the people that tend to go with the second option, granted that there is dishonoring of the feminine, which is the global issue. Now, dishonoring of the feminine creates dishonoring of the masculine, and so on and so forth. Um, and a lot of people now begin to see the onset now, because Aries has been a century in Aries, and she's about to ingress into Taurus in the 50s. We already see the onset of, let's say, women mass murderers or women offenders, and this is why I say that we should be cautious not to perpetuate and not to enter the teeter tatter, which is why it's important to interfere at the situation. Like when a person was a victim and they seek help, that's the situation that can still be, like that's when they can still be prevented from becoming a perpetrator. And you say, but Chile, there were so many people that went through so many things and weren't perpetrators. Each and every one of them were. Whether it was because they didn't mean to, whether it was because they were in dissociation and didn't know, whether it was because they were tortured and were susceptible to mind control. I can definitely say that there are things where, if something is triggering, then it triggers an onset where I could reply bluntly, or I could say something that is very crude. Okay, it's a part of the attempt to purge the toxins, literal and ethereal, from the body. Now, on the softer, on the less immediately distinct version, we have the traditional gender roles or traditional beliefs and misconceptions that I think none of us is exempt from. Chiron will probably do a good job in remediating, bringing that into awareness and discerning. Um, but one of the things I would see is how transactional relations, or even something soft as seen, the man is a material provider, which provides material structure and security, and the woman is an emotional provider. That's why mothers don't mother. Okay, now it's not about shame and blame. I myself was in a situation where, for there was a time where I was the main breadwinner, and I experienced a lot of the challenges that men deal with, like coming back from work, not being able to lift a finger, and having to argue with women about them not asking enough because they have a husband brings back that brings the money. In fact, the only time where a literal revolution happened in the workplace was when a woman was the main breadwinner, and she was a colleague, and I was like, hey, we need to take our break. which, by the way, I also often needed to be reminded of. And then we would go to her house and have coffee, um, and then she was suddenly taking her midday break. She was still making very good money, but by them, the husband was the caretaker for the kids, and she would be the breadwinner. Now, there is, even as I talk about, for example, today I understood. I remember at around the subprime, I was working for a high tech company, running a campus, and I signed a life insurance. And I asked them, "Does it cover for suicide?" And say, "After 6 months, it does." I was fired before the 6 months. Only now I make that connection because I wanted to insure my mom. Um, so I'm not saying I have all the answers for human relations, but just by that segment, I can see how there were so many things that could be traditional concepts. And I ran as a person that was, because of health reasons in the beginning, the main person that was going to like a corporate job, and then I lost my ability to work. Um, right about the time that the person that wasn't dependent on me before became dependent with the subprime crisis. And there were a lot of, even thinking about, well, I'm just a person with a parent that up until the subprime crisis wasn't even financially dependent on me. What, like, there was no, it's kind of like, what if I was a single mom? and and that was again at the high-tech school, which was a friend company or the same co-company as a weapon trade company. I wasn't in the weapon trade business. It's just that the company had like a high-tech school and a weapon trade. Shimkutek Ludan, basically, they were. Um, no, Shimkutek. No, sorry, that was Nest Technologies. That was under the merging and acquisitions, and then I moved to Shimkutek Ludan, which was also a weapon trade company. But I was not doing the weapon trade. I was doing like the programs for installing the programs for the bus tickets. Wow. And that was, and then I saw that the passport was not protected. Um, and we tried to run algorithms. I was asking to have fresh eyes on the code, and there was no nada. Um, and then I was offered to work at a chocolate factory. So, like I said, people don't appreciate people that permeate corruption, particularly when the mistakes fell on the drivers back then. And we talk about people that work 8 to 12 hours on the road, not enough breaks, and whenever there was a mistake, it would be taken down from them, and then we wonder why public transport is not so safe. Later, they made the ticket automatic and so on. So It solved some of the problems for the drivers, but created other problems for the people. Um, some would say, why do we need to pay on public transport when people pay taxes? It's another very good question, particularly with the importance of the freedom of movement in alleviating violent tendencies and regulating the nervous system. Um, okay, if you think about even when an infant is born, then the parent, yes, if the parent can hold the child, but the parent basically rocks that baby, and that movement, or that constant movement, maybe likens to the movement of the fetus in the womb until the baby is able to walk by themselves, and then they have a lot of they play and they move, and when we restrict that, they become neurodivergent. This is why our school system, it doesn't have enough gamification and introduction to physical games and exercises while teaching in the first grades, is creating a pack of tumors in a child. So, um, do I have all the answers? Absolutely not. Chiron is 0 degree Taurus. It's tending to the most fixed Earth sign to do with values, relations, land. Um, the role of the feminine, and while Uranus was shaking things up, with Uranus we had the stay-at-home dad trend. We had, I think, at the end of Taurus we had the tried-wife trend that later was the poisoning the husband trend or something. Um, and Chiron does a different work. Uh, and there is a question, because, how should I say that? The relations between matter and spirit is interesting, and we have the pre-verbal stage of the infant phase, people having to meet those needs adaptively, and the economy has to adapt to meeting those needs adaptively. Um, so there is really a lot to tend to. Like with Uranus, I would get these immediate eurekas that I would have to share, but Chiron is slower. It is slower and more profound. Uranus just goes, tosses things over, and both are very important. And they're also in a semi-sextiles, which means that even the Uranus things, which is science, astrology, and chaos, or occult based on chaos, might not be able to sort out the embodiment issues with Chiron in Taurus. So this is, all in all, challenging, overwhelming, profound. Um, and with Chiron, because Chiron is about finding one's own way, what is compatible per person or per relation, then we may have unusual settings that are actually compatible for the people in them. The pre-verbal, the infant phase is very important. Um, and on a collective level, we'll probably deal with the wounds related to that infanthood phase. And then with Chiron going back to Aries, probably more the wounds related to the fertility, the conception, the birthing, the sense of self of the baby. Basically, it's the head of the baby. Uh, okay, people that were violated and can feel like a guest in their own body, of course, that affects their ability to have relations that feel like home. Um, and the more people are helpless about this, because Chiron is semi-sextiling Neptune, the more profound effect it's going to have on the stable economy. And this is where one of my predictions is that even relations that have been really stable or stable through Uranus in Taurus might be profoundly both curated, by the way, but going through changes with Chiron Taurus. Why? Because for the same reasons we had a magnitude 9 upon the ingress of Chiron to Taurus, which was, by the way, I think around June 19th. So, um, and this is that it is a wound around the fixed earth. So it can be both a wound that is because something is fixed, or because what is usually fixed is not fixed with Chiron in Taurus. Now we had that with Uranus. Um, there is there's something incredibly profound to addressing wounds around embodiment and their connection to currency. Um, it's not a luminary sign, so unless people have like a luminary in Taurus or Venus in a luminary sign, then it's not so much about perception but embodiment, which probably means that just perception might not be suffice to fix it. Um, Now, there's an issue going on with the mother wound, but I don't understand why. Maybe Jupiter at the end of Cancer, or Moon applying to oppose Mars? Because Jupiter was giving us a lot of eurekas around relations and how I think projecting on one that one is something like infants trying to meet their mother needs in people that are themselves still infants, and it can be around, let's say, the square between the midheaven or the ascendant, or and then if they let's say take out things on somebody as they project on them being the parent, they basically harm an infant. I know I've been the recipient of such harm, unfortunately. um, I guess it's because our 10th house has to do with parenting, so people may interpret it as mothering, where that's not necessarily the actual reality of the person. um, and that is kind of like an issue with projections that we all have. If I think about, let's say, celebrity culture, so celebrities were mostly incredibly tortured, and then most of society relate to them on a trauma bond basis. um, and even in the parts when it's like curating from trauma, then there is the role of the 10th house, which is where people, probably, I think none of us is exempt from that, have the projection or the unconscious need or unconscious unmet need in some sort of parenthood that is kind of like an underlying undercurrent. And I kind of think it gets the worst effect, maybe because Venus is in the middle decan of Leo and Sun is in Cancer. Do we see that now? And Moon is in the psychosexual Scorpio, applying to oppose Mars in Taurus. So I think kind of like probably all of us have been both there, because all of us has a tenth have a 10th house. Probably all of us have been both the recipient and the unconscious perpetrator of such dynamics. Um, and Chiron is indeed a wound around relations. Think about the fact that it's very difficult for people to perceive their parents as children, and or people might feel that they perpetuate a certain dynamic of parentified child with figures that are not their actual parent. And even if people are aware of something and want to take space for themselves, they're permeated by a reality of people seeking to meet their inner child needs through the person, through them being the parent when they are tending to their inner infant. um, Lilith 21 degrees Sagittarius. I don't know if Lilith is playing such a big role. I mean, Jupiter is ruling over Lilith. But I think kind of right now it's more Chiron Taurus, and this is it's some of the things that can cause some of the deepest rejection wounds, um, bitterness, because it's an infant phase, and and because there is something very embodied about Taurus, and the wound is around embodiment. It's something that was supposed to be fixed is not, whether in transit or for those that have Chiron return, then then there is basically something quite profound. Something quite profound, particularly when we were supposed to be like done with Uranus in Taurus, and we're not. We're not done with Taurus being activated for a decade, which tells me that we are being prepared for Neptune being there. Of course, for Saturn, but also for Neptune being there. Um, because when Neptune is there, we would need to have curated a lot of what seems to be impossible to even comprehend right now. Okay, think about if we did not know with Chiron Aries that patient sovereignty is necessary. One of the things that I was seeing is that to invoke Maid or Death with Dignity, um, I don't know whether to give a shout out or not because I don't want to activate things that are. But one of the people that talked about basically neurodegenerative diseases mentioned that to invoke assisted death, one would need to be in clear mind, and those diseases tend to harm the mind. Now, this, of course, we already tended to with mental health issues and prolonged trauma, which is mental health issues for those that have any speck of a doubt about that. Um, um, then the fact that people did not have access to, or even the fact that I hear nurses' testimonies when there were people that had a death with dignity and all the family was with them and everything was okay. And then there are the horror stories of executions, or even other horror stories that you hear from people with PTSD. When crime is created by prolonged trauma without ability to exit violence. Um, Now, for every horrible execution like that, there is an enabling of a pattern in creation of perpetrators within those that that commit those executions. I um, and of course the fact that indeed a lot of the issues to do with that, to as I speak, would be um, resolved had there not been prolonged, or had there been exit from violence that on a that can allow curation for the individual, which is of course interrelated with society, culture, religion, and so on, economy. Now we had both Aries and Taurus, with Chiron spending almost a decade with them. So those things were generational issues that challenge a lot of things that, by the way, maybe worked prior to that ingress. Going to my doctor that would make me sit through the iron injections and go through the blood tests and point that there is something of a health crisis that is because of trauma, if we don't see something in the test, that person worked. That person was the best family doctor, and then there was COVID. So a lot of things prior to Chiron ingress to Aries, it's not that there were misconceptions or preconceptions. It's like they worked until. And I think this is where a lot of the people could get flabbergasted or dumbfounded. And I think it's maybe some people could feel the same about Taurus. When we think about patient sovereignty, and the fact that if something happened and people need actually to be safe, that if something happened to them at the helpless stage and they need to be safe, and somebody projecting a power position on them when they're not in that power position, I think probably all of us have been on both sides of that, because it's so unconscious. Then um, and we're definitely going to see how that has to do with housing, real estate, when the harm was perpetuated when a person actually was responsible, was seeking care, because the wound was when they were helpless, and the curation is that they would be not that they would be safe in the situation when they were infant. And when that's not happening, and it's not like a person can consciously be an infant. So that is something that is profoundly horrifying to me when I broadcast, and probably to people that listen. Because it's not something that can be addressed through choices in life, which is Jupiter. Um, and it's not like taking away the sovereignty of a person is just going to work for them. There's something way more profound, particularly when we think about the junctures of the monetary resources allocation behind the scenes and visible, that they have the most of these wounds. So there's really something challenging. It's not like something you can say, with Uranus, and this is also why astrology has an issue sorting out this particular Chiron, because with astrology we can do astrological remediation, or planetary charity, or focus on a particular planet enhancement. And I'm not saying that those things won't work. I'm just saying that with this Chiron, there's something here that might not be able to be resolved by the adult self that, let's say, studies or applies astrological remediation. And because it challenges the core notions of parenting from the get-go, it's also not as easily facilitated um, through. Wait a second. לא כרגע. And but here is the thing that people might have a little bit of curation throughout this to that infant phase, coming in very very weird ways, but then they will only see the things that are wrong in the adult phases, and then that creates some sort of an acceleration where the same person that maybe energetically held us as an infant, we can see how their adult self concepts are not compatible, and we all as a collective deal with the fact that we have to be kind of like both our own grown adults, one another's and our own parent, and the infant phase in various um, I can also see profoundly how for example, people that um, go through some sort of, or want to be surrogates, or go through some sort of things, or apply for that, how the things about the matrilineage come up, um, and how addressing that is profoundly, is not something we can do shadow work about. It's something more profound in at a stage that there really isn't. It's not like a person can take responsibility over themselves, or do shadow work, or go to therapy, or um, and then if they somehow do receive some sort of help, some sort of, then they begin to embodily understand what a person went through this, and people were telling them to go to work, to be independent. Now, of course, let's say, I don't know, women that exited domestic violence, then they were like, oh, if they didn't work before, then getting a job or something like that might be something that would promote whatnot. But then they deal with something at work, and then it's like, okay, there's something more more how should I say, something came at a stage that was previous to the stage of adulthood. And then the same thing with men. Chiron Aries, I think, tended a lot to the soldiers that were harmed at war, the violence between men, towards men, and yes, of course, also to women, but there was a lot about the things that happened within the secret, more secretive, and the real estate, wealth consolidation on real estate that was done through violence, or the first baby or something like that. Okay, kind of like all things Aries. Even Aries was taken kind of like out of context, or in order to. So more things to do with that. I think, for example, when I'm looking at a chart, I think astrology has a lot to do with what we can cognitively, or energetically or ethereally address. Whereas with this particular one, I'm not saying there are no answers, I'm just saying that the fixed Earth is absolute. If you think about the ingress as a magnitude 9, which happens only in a particular region in the northern of Russia in the ocean, and a magnitude 9 earthquake actually happening before the big earthquake with yes, Venezuela, Japan, and California. So think about a magnitude 9 earthquake, and it's like, well, it's in the region where it's possible. Here's kind of like it's in the region where magnitude 9 earthquakes are possible. It's kind of like that magnitude 9 happened upon the first day of the ingress, which definitely depicts something about the earth, the core of the earth not being fixed, and the fact that um, and the fact that that thing was kind of the, when we look at what happens in the ingress, I think it tells us a lot about um, Chiron in Taurus.